Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our London TravelWatch public board, and a really warm welcome if you're watching us this morning on YouTube. Really great to have your interest in what we're doing today. We've got a busy meeting ahead. In a moment, I'm going to be giving a bit of an introduction on recent developments. We're then going to have an in-depth conversation around our work on better transport services, then our regular CEO report, transport monitor, a conversation about our business plan for next year, and then our regular rounds of reporting from all our heads of sections. And I know that we're on a hard stop at 1 o'clock, so we're going to have to keep going at pace to get to the end of all that for 1. So keep going, bear with us through the morning. Let's make a start then with apologies. So we're missing a few board members this morning. Susan is in Japan. I'm afraid Priya is at an interview, and Tiffany is also not here, although I'm pleased to say that we're expecting Tiffany to be back for our January board meeting, so it'll be great to have her back on the board. I mean, she has been engaging with the team in the meantime, and doing really sterling work for the assembly, but it'd be great to have her back around this table. That's it by way of apologies. Then let's move on to minutes and matters arising. Just to check that you're okay on minutes. That's great. And then now matters arising. And this is where I think I have to do a bit of fessing up from the chair, really. So when I had a look at the matters arising over the weekend, it struck me that we haven't really done a terribly good job since the last meeting of doing things that we said, some of the very specific things we said we were going to do. And I'd like to be able to attribute that to the change of secretariat, but it's really down to poor managing by the chair. So what I was going to say is I'll give you an opportunity if there are particular matters arising that you wanted to give us a hard time about. But basically, I think what we need to go away and do is to do a bit of a wash through them all, because there's too many matters arising that we've labelled as ongoing now, when actually they're just things we have to do. So happy to take. I think I'm not proposing to go through them one by one. I'm happy to take individual feedback if there are things where you want to say, please do this to a timeline. But otherwise, what I'd like to do is to go through the whole list and come up with a better version. So I'll give you a moment to give me a hard time, and then I'm going to suggest we take it offline. Thank you for not taking up that opportunity. I welcome that. Good. Okay. So then the next thing is the chair's report. Quite a lot today, but I'll try and keep it quite brief. I was going to start with some sort of diary mechanical forward business stuff for the board. So first, I'd like to say thank you for helping us reschedule the January board meeting. We've got a new date for that now, which Kath has written around you, which I think is the 21st of January. Apologies for having to reschedule a board at only 2 months' notice. I will try not to do that again. I do realise that it's poor practice and you all have other boards and other commitments. We are midway through, now we've got Kath with us, setting up all the rest of the board meetings for the rest of the year. Thank you to those of you who've already come back to us with your availability. 1 or 2 of you haven't, you know who you are. If you haven't yet gone back to Kath, if you could do that this week, that would be excellent, because managing conflicts is really tricky. So, and we are doing this, I think, a little bit later than some other board cycles, so it'd be great to get it sorted out sooner rather than later. The third thing on my list is induction, which is slightly in danger of morphing into development, because you've been here for a while now. As you know, we have a plan for having an induction day, which is a half-day visit, which TfL will host, and then a half-day in the office, going through some more business issues around TravelWatch's duties and protocols and things. We now, I think, we've been struggling to get some dates from TfL for the visit, but I think we've got those now, so we'll be sending those out to you this week, and we hope to get it all done this calendar year. So it's a little bit later than we would have liked, but I think the idea of going out, meeting TfL, having a look at their control centre, and then coming into the office will be a good day and worth trying to bring it all together at one time. So stand by your beds for some dates on that. The fourth thing, and I will talk about some things on the meetings, is a rescheduled session with Andy Lord. So you'll know that Andy Lord was due to see us at the back end of this year and couldn't. We've now agreed to use our date that we already have scheduled of the 19th of March to have Andy Lord along to our board. So that will be great. We are using an existing board date, but we will start a bit earlier in the morning than we normally do. And more details of that to come, but thought you'd want to know that was back in the diary. And then finally, and I think this is a really positive thing, we've agreed with Transport Focus that we will have a joint board with Transport Focus on the topic of rail reform. So we've had, in my time here, we've had a joint board, but we didn't have a very particular theme for it. I think rail reform is such a big issue for travellers that it would be really worth us putting some dedicated time together across the two boards to talk about it. And we've also agreed that we will involve Lord Hendy, who's the Rail Minister, as you all know, and Lord Hendy has agreed to be part of that conversation. So we're going to try and get a date for that in either March or April next year. There's no, it's not very, very urgent, but we do also know that the legislative timeline is working towards July, so probably any later than that will be too late. So we'll be in touch with the department and try and get a session with Lord Hendy, and that will be in addition to our normal board cycle. And that was it. Sorry, that was all a bit bureaucratic, but quite a lot of forward business to talk about. Pause on any of that before I do the rest of it. Great, and then the other couple of things I wanted to mention, one was a Transport Focus update, and I named this on the agenda because I realised that Arthur, who was my predecessor, was doing a much better job than I was of talking to you about what Transport Focus is up to, and Transport Focus is obviously our partner organisation. So I'm going to, in my chair updates, just give you a little bit of insight into the stuff that Transport Focus is doing, which is most relevant to London TravelWatch. And I think the two things to mention today are, first, I think an initiative that Transport Focus has taken on dealing with disproportionate responses to fare evasion, or to people not having the right documentation on trains or doing penalty fares, where they've been, I think, deserve praise for having effectively lobbied ministers and taken up with the industry some of the practices that I think our casework team has seen of people being fined and sometimes even prosecuted, even when there was no revenue loss to the railway industry. And Susan really helpfully came up with some good examples of cases that we'd seen where that has been the case. So today, Louise Haig has announced a review by ORR, particularly on prosecutions, but what are the situations in which fare evasion leads to prosecutions? And that feels like a really good piece of passenger advocacy where which will be a benefit to London's passengers as much as to those outside London. And then the second thing to mention is the work on a passenger standards authority, which some of us have been discussing separately, just to flag in the public session that Transport Focus and ORR are supporting the department in preparing for a consultation which could come before the end of this calendar year. At the minute, our understanding is that London TravelWatch won't be within scope of that consultation, but we're keeping very close to it. So those are the two Transport Focus things that I thought was worth briefing the board on. And then finally, I thought I would share with you that I've just completed the set of mid-term conversations with some of the board members who've been here a bit longer than the ones who are in the room today, so with Priya and with Susan. And I find those have been really, really good discussions, and I have certainly benefited from having one-to-one conversations with people outside the board meeting. If I was going to feed back to the board the key message that's come out of some of those conversations, it's just to keep challenging ourselves on what we're here for, to just keep testing as a board, are we clear about our organisational purpose and what success looks like at organisational level as opposed to for each of the work streams individually. And that was also something that came out, I think, from our away day, which we may talk about a bit later under Michael's report. So that sense of are we, does the board collectively have a clear vision for the organisation and is giving it a clear mission for its success? So I thought it worth sharing that back with the other board members because it's such a powerful message coming back from those conversations. And that was all I was going to say by way of chair update. So that's gone on a bit longer, but any reflections or questions on any of that?
Question for me. Are we articulating a new vision then? Is that resulting in you were saying about the discussions with board members? Are you going to present a paper to the board? Or?
So so we had an away day with the team a couple of weeks ago, week past on Monday, where one of the products of that was the elements of what a new, I think a new mission rather than a vision might look like. And I think the next step in that is for us to digest it, work on it as a team, and then bring it back to the board.
Okay, thank you.
If that's all right, shall we move on then to our first substantive item, which is Alex, star of social media star, Alex. And I think it would be appropriate actually just before handing over to Alex to congratulate Alex and the team and Sonia on the work that was done running up to the publication of the bus report. So the board has, was really grateful, I think, for the opportunity to be involved in that work at different stages. And it was so great to see how well it landed and the positive coverage. So really well done, Alex, and do pass that on to the team. So, and today you're here to talk about the work programme that sits around the bus report.
Yes.
So over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. Very much a team effort, so I will definitely pass that on. So this is around the business priority for better transport services. I'll take the paper as read, but just still give a little bit of an overview. So this is part of the wider priority, which as Tricia mentioned, the bus report is, I guess, almost sort of getting back to the basics of transport. Is it reliable? Is it turning up on time, frequency, that sort of side of things, more operational side of things. So to accompany the bus report, which is looking at how we can improve those services, TfL can improve those services, we want to look at other parts of the network as well. And the idea is that we've got a couple of spotlights highlighting sort of pain points or issues on the network. And these will obviously be useful bits of work themselves, but also potentially kind of a trial for how we might want to build on these in future, maybe a sort of series of work in future business plan years, but that will come later. So I wanted to kind of check in on that. The idea is one will be on TfL services and one will be on National Rail services, just to kind of cover our remit. Trevor, who is not here, has been doing a lot of work in kind of desk research and scoping out potential areas, which are included later on in the paper, which was used to inform internal discussion we had to kind of narrow that down and look at the two areas that we'll focus on. And the two things that came out of that, well, two things that mainly came out of that session was Euston Station. This is something that we, to be honest, we've been working on quite a long time. Sort of, I think Susan in particular, you've kind of highlighted and raised concerns with the passenger experience at the station for probably over a year now. And then it's been building, and I guess it must have been a couple months ago now. There's a lot of media media coverage, building public pressure, and Network Rail have set up announced a 5-point plan to improve the station. So Michael in particular is feeding into that, but it's thinking about how we can kind of create this work around that to support what we're already doing. And I think a bit bigger as well, particularly with the news that HS2 is going to be terminating at Euston. There's kind of a longer term picture there as well. And then the second area that we kind of focus on for now is the Central Line. So I don't know if anyone here uses it regularly, but there's been substantial issues over the past year due to faulty trains and slow replacements, and they've had a reduced timetable operating, and not necessarily a clear idea of when it's going to return to normal. And again, it's kind of looking at that, and that's we've wrote to Andy Lord over the summer. It's now a few months later. I'm going to pick that back up and push it. And again, thinking both about what's happened and sort of learnings that they can take for that, but also what they're going to do about it going forward. The reason I mentioned two points is that there's also a real pipeline of other ideas that are included in there, which we're not necessarily taking forward at this point, but I think are likely, or at least some of them are likely to be things that we pick up as we progress. So that's a very top line overview of it. But where we well, any feedback is very welcome. But where I'm particularly interested in views on is if you agree with the summary prioritization that was captured in the options paper discussion note. And then also if there's any other obvious parts of the network that you think we've missed or should be considered. Yes. So I don't know if anyone has any questions off the back of that, otherwise I can open to thoughts.
That's great. So you've got the questions at page 2 of the Cameron paper, and just to make sure that we're super clear about the context. So this is part of, so probably because I got this all wrong when we had the workshop, but this is part of the better transport priority that we discussed as a board. But it's very consciously, let's do one thing on rail and let's do one thing on underground, because we've managed bus separately. So this isn't the place to be thinking about the intermodal experience. This is the ground rules are, where should we be focusing our attention on rail and where should we be focusing our attention on tube? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So against that background, I mean, Michael, did you want to add any thoughts, particularly I think on the recent experience on Euston, which is the drive behind having suggested Euston as being a priority for this work?
Yeah, so as Alex rightly said, Euston's been on our radar screen for certainly since the point at which the ticket office debate came up, because Euston was one of those stations where proposals have been put forward. But there have been a number of interactions basically since then where we have been flagging up to Network Rail and others who are based at the station that there are issues with the customer experience. Most recently, there have been particularly difficult circumstances, particularly when services have been disrupted. And of course, we kind of flagged this up in the media recently, and not long afterwards, we had an announcement from the Secretary of State that something needed to be done, and there's a 5-point action plan which is being taken forward by Network Rail. As part of the action plan, I'll talk a little bit about what's covered in that at a headline level. Network Rail have set up an oversight board, which is composed of Network Rail, operators at the station, and myself. I was invited to join that and took part in the first meeting last month. And I thought it was a well chaired event. And my sense was that many of the kind of obvious things that have been identified as issues that need to be addressed at the station were on the minds of the industry players around that table. And there was, I felt, a genuine spirit of wanting to address these issues. And I think that the awareness of the issues has been there for a while. And if there's a sense of frustration as advocates for the passenger, such as us, I think the frustration is, well, something should have been done about this earlier, but I think there is now the will to do something. The sorts of issues that have been discussed within and amongst the industry players around the boarding arrangements, making those smoother, and some changes have already taken place. Some of these are quite small, but if you're a user at Euston Station, they now remove the announcement of a train service 2 minutes before departure from the information screens, which is practice in other termini as a way of trying to avoid situations where people are running at the last minute and creating a risk. So there are some micro changes around boarding, but there are other ideas around boarding arrangements which they want to introduce and which are being trialled. Issues around the use of customer information screens, and in particular, what should be done with the large 60-meter screen on the concourse, which has been used predominantly for advertising recently, and which has been a source of much dissatisfaction amongst people who use Euston. So the advertising has stopped, and now the Network Rail and others are thinking about how that screen can be used better to serve the needs of passengers. Issues around making sure staff are visible and helpful on the concourse, trying to promote a one-team approach at Euston that brings together all of the different players under effectively a guiding mind for how the station is managed, and of course ensuring that at the end of the day the services that come in and out of the station are more reliable than they have been, because if that isn't working properly, then all the other things will follow as a consequence. So lots of content being discussed. I think a genuine spirit of wanting to address that. And it's great that we've been asked to kind of participate and make sure that the interests of consumers are represented in those discussions. We now need to see whether stuff is going to happen as a consequence of all of this goodwill. The focus is very much on what can be done in the short term before Christmas, but they are also conscious that there's a midterm agenda here. So there's things around changing the layout of the existing station, which would take a bit more money and a bit more time to bring into play. But that is to be looked at in greater earnest after Christmas. And then, of course, much longer term, as Alex said, a new HS2 station in and around Houston. What might that look like? That is also on people's minds, but again, it's even much longer term in concept.
Great, thank you. So Alex's paper suggests cracking on with Houston as being the rail priority and the central line, given the continuing poor passenger experience. And you'll have seen that in the monitor report as well. It comes through very loud and clear. So I guess for the board does that sound, what do you think about that? And I think more interesting probably as a question is, how, given this is quite a new way of us doing things, how can we do it in a way that will have the most impact? So if we're going to be spotlighting particular parts of the network, are there ways in which we can go about it that will make it more successful?
Shall I kick off?
Please do.
The silence. I agree with the prioritisation. I think it's really sensible. And then you've got like a pipeline of projects over the future years, and the business plan is rolling forward this priority as well. So that works well. I guess having sort of capacity in maybe 2026 around kind of like rail reform as well when that starts to come in, is whether this could be the kind of thing that could be picked up under this this heading. I thought it was really helpful as well because it's sort of like how does the transport industry cope, or how does the transport industry approach things when things go wrong? So there was a natural defensiveness, I think, in Network Rail and maybe TfL as well. So being able to pick up issues like the Central Line where they will say something around, we're doing this because we know this is a problem, and then it just goes quiet, and you don't necessarily know what's actually being happened or what change is really taking place. So I think that makes a lot of sense as well. And it looks like it's the principles you got within the paper as well are out trying to kind of focus on things where you can make a difference as well. So when there are discussions going happening, or when you know you can implement something, I think is really helpful as well. Yeah. Sorry, that was just a
that was lovely. Great, thank you, Lara.
Thanks very much for the report. I think that's really, really interesting. And I completely agree that I think Houston should be a primary focus in terms of the rail. In terms of tube, I can understand the issues with the Central Line, but I'm also a little bit concerned about the Bakerloo line. I think just because of the sustainability, the fact that there are no new, we don't have new train stock, so it feels like this is an issue which potentially is going to become a much bigger issue, and there isn't currently a clear sort of solution to that. And particularly with us being at the start of the new government and needing new train stock potentially being something where it may require influencing government to kind of understand this situation and how important it is. I wonder whether or not the Bakerloo line might be an area to look at in more detail.
I mean, on that, shall I pick up that point? I guess there's two dimensions to that. One is supporting what TfL and others are doing to argue the case for sufficient funding for the upgrade. But the other part is that it'll take time for an upgrade and new trains to come on stream, and there is a risk that the oldest fleet on the network is going to start performing even worse.
Yeah.
And so what is the plan to try and make sure that services are sustained to as good a quality as possible in the interim? It's almost like, Bakerloo is possibly going to be the next Central Line that we're now experiencing. So part of our thinking is that, maybe for next year, shining a light on, what is it that can be done to try and keep services as good as they possibly can be, as well as thinking about trying to accelerate the introduction of the new fleet as soon as possible.
Eddie?
Yeah.
Really good paper, takes you lots of interesting facts in it, brilliant.
two stats stood out for me in particular, the reduction in DLR by 5% of users and the reduction in central line by 3% and how that's going to have a significant impact on the Mayor's 2041 target. So I think those stats should be the drivers going forward within your work programs. I think that'd be really powerful. The other part of the report, which was interesting, something really important for me, which isn't mentioned, is the buying a ticket at a station and the complexity of it. It's got so confusing now for many members of the public, and I've experienced that myself. Because recently I bought a ticket at the ticket machine. I bought a more expensive ticket because I couldn't understand the options. I arrived at my destination and I was told I was overcharged. There was no need to have an expensive ticket, but I didn't know as a member of the public that. And then this morning I bought my ticket at the ticket office because I wasn't able to get the cheaper option at the machine. Those are significant issues for many people buying tickets at the station. And I wonder if we could incorporate those elements into the work going forward.
So can I just draw that together into two questions really, Alex? And I mean, I think Eddie's is very straightforward, is how do we pick up ticketing as a consumer challenge in our work programme? But the other one that came out of, I think, was Rick a little bit, but Lara a lot, is in building our pipeline, how do we decide how much attention to focus on the issue, which is already today's big issue, which is, I mean, both the Central Line and Euston are already all over the papers, versus the Bakerloo line example, which is the issue that's going to be the next one. So I mean, and this is not really for now, because I'm getting a consensus that we crack on with these things. But in building a pipeline, how much do we want to be going for the high profile obvious targets, and how much do we want to look ahead and see what the next challenge is? So I think that's quite a difficult, complicated question. But do you want to start on ticketing?
Yeah, so I think I don't want to jump ahead to the business plan conversation, but I think, I mean, as you said, ticketing I think is a huge issue. I think it is definitely something that came out of the ticket office consultations last year, and I think it's intrinsically linked to just the fare system. It's just so confusing and complex. As Tricia mentioned, they're doing the review of enforcement on the network, but again, a lot of those issues come because people don't understand the right ticket to buy. So I think it's definitely something, I'm not sure, it could potentially sit in this, but I think it could also potentially sit in something around, basically, does it deserve its own kind of big piece of work is the question that I'm kind of wondering, and I think that might be sort of a potential thing. Trying to think back to the business plan paper.
Should we hold that thought to the business plan conversation? But I think you're right, that's the right place to address it. And then on the kind of emerging issues versus hot topics.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think at this point, as you say, probably power on with these two if the board are happy with that. But I think particularly around the Central Line and Bakerloo Line, it's almost like it's worth doing a bit of a deep dive on that now, so that we can take the lens from that and then sort of say, you know, this is potentially going to be a really big problem on the Bakerloo Line. You need to learn these things, embed these things, and think about, you know, before it becomes a problem, how are you going to make sure the services keep running as well as they can. So yeah, I guess it's kind of looking at the Central Line, but with a bit of a forward look within there, and then potentially, yeah, again in the next business year, that I think Bakerloo Line potentially is one. So I think there's kind of a common theme across a few different parts of the network, and I've seen it on trams as well. You mentioned the DLR, just underfunding for you know, however many years, and now kind of that is coming to bear on the network. So I think it's probably going to be quite pertinent learnings whatever comes out of the Central Line. Don't know if that quite answers that
No,
question.
I think it does. It's always going to be a tricky balance, and kind of Eddie's points on the impact of the financial environment on the ability to support particular groups of consumers. That may also be a lead indicator for some of the performance issues that we're likely to see as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good question as well around where would our voice have the most impact. If there's lots of people already shouting about something, it may still be useful for us to add to that, but you know, is there another issue that no one's talking about that could become a huge issue, that by addressing it a bit earlier, hopefully we can kind of put in solutions a bit sooner as well.
Yeah.
Very good question.
But I was massively sorry. I'm going to stop congratulating people in a moment. But so any doubts I had about our ability to move the dial, the way that the sequencing of Euston, it was demonstrably we had an impact on the timing and substance of the work that's being done. So I think that's, yeah, even though that was already being a well socialized issue, our involvement. Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from colleagues is yes, these are two really sensible topics to focus on. In thinking about building a pipeline, let's come back to the ticketing conversation as part of the wider business plan. Let's think about coming issues, particularly Bakerloo line, as well as current issues, and let's look at risk through the lens of what are the financial pressures on the on TfL as an organisation and on the rail sector. So that's super helpful, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we manage to do. What are the next steps, Alex? So, and the timeline.
Sorry. Yeah, it's not my drink. So next steps, Trevor and I are now looking at, obviously a lot of this is already in train, I'm not intended, particularly around Euston Station, thinking about a more strategic kind of longer term look at these, but Trevor and I are pulling together that plan at the moment, in particular outputs and timings. I think, again, mentioned Euston is already very much underway, but picking up Central Line, and I think we're coming up to 1 year since the issues kind of started in earnest, so I think that's a kind of milestone for the first hit, but happy to share kind of those steps once we've got them a bit more hammered out.
And have you reached, sorry, we'll delay too long, but have you got a firm view at the moment about what the products look like of the work? I mean, is it a document? Is it, what's the thing?
I think, or what we're kind of thinking at the moment is that it could look different for the two different spotlights to kind of make sure we're doing what's most effective. I think, that probably includes some letters to TfL and that sort of correspondence side of things. Euston, it might be kind of a longer term look. I think we're looking at comparisons potentially with other stations as well, kind of, where is the passenger experience good, what can they take from that, and that might potentially be a bit more of a short paper or things like that. Also keen obviously to engage with passengers in this as well and get their views, so a little bit of primary research as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Well done.
Thank you.
It's really good. Right. Okay. So I think we're on to a cluster of Michael items next. So starting with, so we've got starting with the CEO report, and then the monitor, and then we get into the business plan for next year. But would you like to start with the CEO report?
Yes, thank you, Tricia. So a couple of things to pull out from the report. I think three things really. One, in terms of the engagement recently with the various stakeholders, I think for myself, probably the standout item just to share with the board is the meeting we had with the Executive Committee of Transport for London. Myself and Tricia went along to that. I mean, we obviously, the whole team has regular engagement at various levels with TfL, but we think this is the first time, certainly for a long time, that we've had a conversation with basically the senior management team led by Andy Lord. It was a really useful complement to all of the individual interactions that we have with Transport for London team. It was quite a strategic level conversation, but at the same time, it was grounded in some very specific stuff. So what had been going on cybersecurity and TfL's response to that, for example. Lots of follow-up action and meetings. Some of them were meetings that we already had in the diary with individual members of the SLT, and others are meetings that have been set up specifically for the purpose. One of those bits of follow-up is around Transport for London's customer care score, how it measures the degree to which people feel that the organisation cares for them and the strategy that sits behind that. So that's one of the kind of important bits of follow-up that we have coming up. A really useful meeting, and one that we intend, at their suggestion, in fact, I think it was, to repeat on a regular basis, half yearly or yearly. The second thing to mention is the session that I joined of the Budget and Performance Committee of the London Assembly. it was carrying out its regular review of the emerging proposals for next year's GLA budget, the budget that funds the various organisations that sit within the GLA group, the most substantive of which in financing terms is Transport for London. So I was on a panel with some other specialists, and the committee was keen to interrogate the panel for their thoughts on risks to TfL's budget, what the priority should be for TfL funding and the like. I was quite interested to see that within the last week, the committee, which is chaired by Neil Garrett, Assembly member, has written to the Mayor making various points on the back of the contributions from the panel, but they explicitly picked up a number of the points that we had made. So we had flagged that there are some risks to the TfL budget due to the flattening out of customer demand to use TfL services, and the committee has written to say that there needs to be clarity about how that's going to be addressed. We talked about the need to sustain investment in renewals, which is very relevant to the conversation we've just had about bits of the network which are suffering from lack of investment. So the committee's picked that up as well. So probably more so than I had anticipated, it proved to be a very useful session. And then the final thing to pull out from the report is, as Patricia mentioned, we had a meeting with the whole team, not a meeting, we had an away day of the team over at City Hall, just reflecting on how we operate. And lots of really useful stuff came out of the discussion. Some of the key points for me were, first of all, I think a pretty universal sense around the team that in thinking about next year's business plan, we need to be more realistic. We bit off more than perhaps we could chew for this year, which I think was a conversation we had around this table last time we all met. And that needs to be reflected in our plan for next year. A sense, as we've just been talking about, that we could do with a clearer vision, co-created with the board, around what sort of organisation London TravelWatch should be and what our aspirations are for the future as an organisation. A number of things internally, what are our values as an organisation, and something we want to revisit. We haven't done that in a while. Issues around flexible working, which is very topical more generally for all employers, not just for us as London TravelWatch, and just the environment in which we operate and the degree to which people feel comfortable in challenging the way things are done or the priorities that we might be addressing. So bags of stuff for us to convert into a kind of program of activity to address the things that people flagged up, but really useful conversation. So those are the three I just wanted to pull out, but of course there's plenty else in the report. I'm happy to talk about that with the board.
Thank you very much, Michael. And just to say, Michael's evidence in front of the committee is very watchable. So if you just watch Michael's vid, you don't have to watch the whole 3 hours. But but it's all there if you want to see it. It was great to see such impact of that. Any questions or comments on Michael's report? Do you want to say a little bit? I know that we weren't going to do it. I think it would be helpful for the conversation we're about to have. Say a little bit about business plan delivery and the RAG rating in the report as well. Partly to set us up for the item after next.
Yes. So the summary on the first page, as I mentioned, the status of the various streams is the same in all cases except for the final one around insight, and I've tried to explain why that is in the paper. I mean, just briefly to touch on some of the others. I mean, some of the ones that are amber probably have a more greenish tinge to them than last time. So, for example, on work stream 3 around Transport for London's ambition in building trust, the whole issue about customer care and TfL's approach to that, I would say that's a bit greener now than it was before, on the basis of the conversation, the engagement we had at the Exco. But I didn't make it green because I think the conversation is great, but there's going to be some sort of output from it before I would want to colour it green. I think on work stream 6, closer working with the Transport Committee, that's almost certainly a green, but I'd rather get through the presentation of our business plan proposal to the Transport Committee in a few weeks' time before doing that. Never take anything for granted. But again, I think that's one where the status will change for the better. One which I think is definitely green, but it's taking a lot of hard work to keep it green. Work stream 7 around improved casework operations. A lot of work going on between Susan in particular and her team with colleagues in Transport Focus to ensure that the service we get from our contact centre provider Found Ever is where it needs to be. So it's green, but it's taking a lot like a swan. There's a lot of paddling going on underneath the water to retain that. But happy to take any more kind of detailed questions on across that piece, or indeed for the team to.
Thank you. So a welcome comments on anything in Michael's report, but I think in particular, just building on that last bit, would be helpful to have any reflections on the detailed conversations that I know have been happening, some of which are captured in Michael's report on individual work streams. I know that not all of them have happened yet, but I think by the end of this month, everybody will have had at least one conversation. So how have those been for you? Are you comfortable with the way in which you're having an opportunity to feed into the work? How would you like that product reflected back at the board? So welcome reflections on that in particular. I think.
Can I ask my question about his report? Just picking up on TfL and funding, and number 3 priority about building greater trust. So I was at a meeting recently and somebody mentioned the surpluses that TfL make each year. So last year I think it was 130 million. This year it's forecast to be 61 million. That's nearly 200 million. How are TfL communicating that to the public, especially the dissatisfied service users of TfL, just around accountability and openness? How are they using that surplus to improve services, for example? I know it's going to be a lot of competing demand for that money. How does that get communicated?
I think the formal way in which it's communicated is through the business plan, which is in the public domain. I think historically, though I'm not up to speed with what they're doing at the moment, historically, Transport for London has, for example, used the adverts on the tube to explain to explain that it gets a lot of its revenue from income, and it also has some sort of public funding support, but that it's not there to make a profit. Everything that it gets by way of revenue is returned into improving the service, and that is also the case with the operating surplus. So and what that is a description of is the extent to which they are covering or doing better than covering their operating costs. TfL, I think, is very clear that all of that money, where they do make a surplus, where there is headroom between revenue and their operating costs, that is pumped back into improving the services without the need to rely so heavily on public funding through the grant that's made by the Mayor. So personally, I feel comfortable that the narrative from TfL is in the right place, that they're explaining that they're trying to become more efficient in the way in which they run their services, to the extent that that creates financial headroom, that opportunity is then reinvested for the benefit of Londoners.
Other questions?
Sorry, it was just following on from that, which is, I guess, the impact of like fare rises next year. So if TfL do go for RPI plus 1% as for National Rail, what the implications of that might be, both in terms of kind of I suppose how they might spend any surplus, but also the impact on passengers as well. I guess it's something. Obviously, I'm sure you're preparing your lines for the media when there's more coverage of that. When TfL make a decision about when do TfL make a decision about fares next year?
I'm not sure when precisely. I mean, we would expect. I mean, obviously, we'd expect the announcement somewhere ahead of March.
Yeah, there's no sort of like set date, unhelpfully. But normally, I think it's around December at the latest.
Yeah.
To give them time to feed the fares into the system.
When I worked in DFT, my recollection, it was always item 1 in the Christmas media handling brief. So it's sometime around Christmas, I think.
When I was at Cafe Road Transport, we had 3 hits every year.
Yeah.
There was the August inflation figure.
Yeah.
There was the autumn when the fares were announced, and then there was January when the fares came in.
That's right. That's right. I mean, things are slightly different now because it's not. It actually is. It happens in March, but I mean, in terms the Budget and Performance Committee of the Assembly, part of their letter was to say, "Dear Mayor, please can you clarify what is going to happen on fares sooner rather than later." So whether or not that prompts an earlier rather than later announcement about what he intends to do remains to be seen. I think our position is that the mayor has it in his gift, as it were, to decide whether or not Transport for London fares will mirror what has happened with national rail fares, the above inflation increase that you mentioned. Obviously, his room to do something, as he did last year, where he essentially made financial provision for a fares freeze, his room for manoeuvre is going to be constrained by the fact that revenue through the fare box is turning out to be lower this year than their budget had anticipated. And in large part, that's the reason why the operating surplus is now forecast to be significantly less. So he's got less room for manoeuvre. But we have said, well, to the extent that you have room for manoeuvre, if we had to choose a priority, it would be to favour bus users in anything that's done around fares for next year, on the basis that buses are the most widely used form of public transport, the most accessible, all the sorts of things that we've discussed around this table. So we try to indicate where, if anywhere, we would make the hard choice, and also to remind him that he has the ability to make a decision, not necessarily to follow what's happening on national rail.
Although the central government assumption is that he will, isn't it? Yeah.
But the funding package that's been agreed is on that basis. One final thing is that we've said that ideally there should be a rather more strategic approach to what's happening to fares in London. So at the moment, it feels like every year we come to this point and the mayor decides, well, am I going to do something to soften the blow? And what we're saying is, look, for the length of the mayoralty, think about what you're doing with fares. How would you keep them affordable, given what you might forecast that's happening with household fares, the cost of motoring, whatever, and plan to deliver whatever it is you want to do to try and keep them affordable and attractive. Now, that's not the same as saying you've got to cut the fares all the time. It's just saying, relative to all the other things that people have to consider when they're dealing with all the spending pressures, what's a kind of medium-term approach to doing the best thing you possibly could do for Londoners, and then put that into place, rather than what feels like an annualized, rather tactical response to that question. And that's something when we come onto the business plan, we think it's worth kind of developing as a piece of work for us.
And which landed very well when you said that to, I think, both committees.
Yeah.
You said that to both committees.
Yeah.
Laura.
I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about the accessibility audit and whether or not there was any particularly interesting findings that's come out of that.
Yeah, so the short answer is, personally, I'm still trying to process what I heard in the debrief from the head of inclusion and accessibility at Network Rail. But just to take one step back, an audit was carried out at least a couple of years ago now, of the level of accessibility across all of the 2,500 odd stations rail stations in Britain, which obviously include a significant number in our remit. It generated a lot of data. The rail industry has been kind of processing all of that stuff, some of which was shared at a summit that was chaired by the then minister a year ago. And the headline finding was that there's no single rail station across the country that meets all of the criteria for what one would describe as accessible. I think the industry's been doing more work to kind of distill from all of this data that they've collected into something that then is useful as an insight of where things are at, and then more importantly, what gets done about it. And that's the stage I think we're at the moment, is they're trying to think, they're trying to decide what do we do with the information they've got. My interest in having the conversation, which may or may not make it into what we do next year, is first of all, could we see some of that information as it relates to stations in our patch to inform whether or not we want to be active in some way? If we spotted that there are, I don't know, X proportion of stations that are particularly bad, we might want to campaign on that. So point one is, can we have some visibility of that? And my sense is, but this is to be tested, my sense is that certainly at an officer level within Network Rail, they'd be open to sharing that in the right way. But the second thing is this point of, for whatever information they have or whatever insight about the state of accessibility, I think the interesting point for us is then, is this something we want to campaign on, possibly transport focus, where, for some sort of increase of effort, acceleration of effort, increase of investment to at least improve the quality of accessibility from where it is now. So work in progress in a nutshell.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I just have
Yes,
one more, which is around the cyber attack. So I guess
yes.
it's not our role to go into kind of like the systems within TfL, but it's had an impact on passengers. So I was wondering whether there's any kind of learning from that and how prepared TfL is in terms of future risks for them and the impact on passengers. I guess it's sort of complicated also because this is a public meeting. You don't necessarily want to say too much.
Well, I think it's a not unreasonable assumption. So first of all, what I think we take from our engagement with TfL is that the response by the organisation to addressing the cyber attack has been really substantial. It's been an enormous effort in a very small period of time to obviously to address the initial impact, and then to think about, well, what might that mean more generally for their system. So I think we have come away with a very clear impression that this has become, like a huge priority and it's absorbed a lot of resource. Secondly, we don't know yet, but it's not unreasonable to think that there may be some kind of longer term consequences if as a result of this they identify that there are issues around their current approach to cybersecurity. There may need to be a program of work which is not just about the immediate response, but longer term, with the consequence for resources. But we're not privy to what all that might look like. I think more in the real world and the impact on customers. I think, as with other occasions when there's been some form of disruption to the services that TfL provides, the quality of information back to customers in real time as things are being addressed is not always as good as we would like it. And a lot of our interaction has been around, the extent to which TfL is communicated properly, what customers can expect, if they can't get their, they can't renew their zip card or their Oyster photo card, what is it they can expect in terms of the approach to refunds? When is it that they can expect the system to be, back up and running? And to their credit, when we have raised issues with TfL about, for example, what's the information on the website saying, to their credit, they have responded quickly. But, occasionally we still spot things. And in an ideal world, you'd hope that they'd spot it first. But I guess that's why we're here, to spot these things and to hold them to account and to ensure that things get done. But that's probably one of the most obvious things, quality of information, and trying to ensure that they're putting customers first, particularly those photo card holders who are carrying the financial consequence in the interim until things get sorted out, of having to pay fares that are higher than they would expect with their normal discount. That I think is one of the other kind of obvious impact.
So I totally agree with that. I think clearly our job is to spot and escalate issues where the customer is not being as well looked after as they could. It was very difficult at the TfL Expo not having human sympathy with that senior team. about the demands that this has placed on them as a crisis management exercise, and the opportunity cost for the organisation in terms of crowding out some of the other things they might have wanted to talk about. So I think it was a massive deal for them. And when we're thinking about what else they're doing, I think it's important to understand that that's been the dominant conversation for a really long time. Great question. Any other reflections? Anybody want to kind of share back into the room the conversations you've been having on individual work streams, or any other kind of reflections on how we're going? Don't have to. You can do that another way if you like. You've not had yours yet.
Let's do conversations. So really helpful.
Yes.
So the seamless journeys one, Michael, about sort of just making sure that we understand what we're getting into before starting. And it is a huge topic. So finding the London TravelWatch locus within that, I think, is really important. So the suggestion of having a stakeholder meeting is a good idea.
Yeah. Great, and I'm glad that's going well. I'm glad that the rest are at least scheduled. And I mean, I think maybe when we next meet, let's put aside a bit more time for a bit more reflective conversation of how you're helping to shape that work and what your feedback is. Because I think I think it's pretty clear. I'm really keen that we don't just do stuff in a room, because meetings are meetings. Great, thank you very much. And then a relatively brief discussion, I think, Michael, of the monitor, which is the regular what's going on out there according to TfL, and then what's happening in the real world. So yeah, that one.
I'm sure members will have taken away their own thoughts from the content, so I don't want to second guess that. But just for me to, again, three things to pull out. The first of which I think we've already touched on. So there's a reference to the impact of the cybersecurity attack in the Commissioner's report. That's a bit behind the curve in that, since then, TfL, if you go on their website now, they have said that they will start processing some of the applications for cars by a certain point in time. They have set out their approach to what happens in the interim for other photocard holders. So if you want the most up-to-date version of what is happening in response to the impact on customers, get to the TfL website and the relevant bit, rather than the Commissioner's report, which is a month or so behind the times. Second thing is, given that we've just published our report on buses and the challenges around falling bus speeds, I did have a look at the extract that refers to bus speeds, and actually when you read the narrative around that, it highlights congestion as one of the problems, but it also flags up a number of other things. So I think there's something around staff shortages, which presumably means that some services are. But I only pick it out, A, because it's topical, and B, because it signals that the issues around falling bus speeds is probably more complex than one might appreciate at face value. And it's probably worth us having more of a conversation with TfL about as we follow up our bus report. And then final thing to mention is that, and it's in the cuttings part of the monitor, since we last met, we've had budget announcements from Rachel Reeves, and there were significant parts of that that relate to London, including but not just a slug of just under £500 million worth of capital funding for TfL to progress with their capital renewal. So worth maybe just highlighting that's been a significant thing that's happened since we last met.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, but let's see what other people have first. Or I'll ask my questions then. So I was glad that you mentioned staff shortages across both tube and bus. Is that something which is that in your sense is that an emerging issue? Because it does seem to be slightly creeping up the kind of awareness. And then the second question I had, which I guess Susan may be able to help with, was in the monitor paper. There's a 4% increase in complaints. There's a 1% increase in journeys, so there are more people, but there's more complaints per journey than there are. Is there something specific going on in this period that or do we see that as being just an increase in complaints? So we'll come back to that one in a moment. But the staff shortages one, Alex or Michael, is this coming as a topic?
Alex, do you want to venture? Or? or citizens.
It seems to be an increasing issue. I think it's hard to tell the scale. I mean, I just on a personal note, I think a couple of weekends ago, I walked to the tube station and it was closed for staff shortages. And it seems to be quite, I think was it Canary Wharf maybe a month or so ago, which is obviously a very big station to
It's huge.
close.
Canary Wharf closed for staff shortages.
It was only
Shocker.
temporarily, but obviously has a big impact.
Yeah.
I think it was a peak time as well. So I'm looking at Susan in case you remember.
Yeah.
So it does seem to be one, but I think we need to do kind of a bit more wider monitoring to kind of get a proper idea of the scale. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Susan?
I just think it might be that the staff need to be stretched to the absolute maximum. So like anyone going out, because they usually with TfL safety critical as well.
Yeah.
So anyone going out means the station has to shut down. They do have like I think they still have roving teams, but you know if there's a lot of problems on the network, then the roving teams will go out and some stations will close. But it is unusual for things like Canary Wharf to close.
Yeah.
You normally usually see the smaller stations, or they're still central, like maybe Chancery Lane or Holborn or things like that. Yeah, it was quite unusual. I think with the Canary Wharf, there was more than one member of staff went out, and there has been a sudden uplift in COVID that's reared its head. And obviously, if you're public facing, you can't go in. I mean, we all carried on working, but we were nice, and safe, and tucked up at home. But when you're public facing, you can't do that. So that could have something to do with it, because the NHS are reporting peaks as well with the COVID. So
I wonder whether this is something that we keep an eye on in the run up to our session with Andy Lord in March, because it's not a here and now. We must do a report about this kind of issue, but withdrawal of service is quite a dramatic thing, and reputationally, for very at odds with I think where TfL is trying to get to. So I let's just put this on the things that we might just want to track and see if we can get some data to support a conversation with Andy in March. And then on complaints more generally.
cyber attack.
Oh, is this all cyber attack?
Well,
yes.
it has increased the number of complaints.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it's also to increase the number of complaints more than once. So you'll have somebody write in, not get a response, and then write it again, and they're counted as two rather than as one person.
Right.
So that always has an impact. Although I'm always a bit careful here, because if you make it easy to complain, which is what we want, you'll get an uplift, and that's seen as negative. Whereas, if an organisation is open to complaints and makes it very easy to complain, we'd want that. So.
But good to understand, yes. And gosh, the danger of sounding too soft, given the scale of the cyber attack, a 4% uplift in complaint. If that's not, things could have been a lot worse, but that's not a thing that a chair of a passenger advocacy body should say. So I'll stop. All right. Thank you very much. Any other reflections on the report or questions for Michael? Lara.
I just had a question about the 4G, 5G coverage, just because I've noticed all of a sudden on some tubes I can get a signal, and I didn't really understand what it was part of in terms of a wider scheme and how far-ranging it's planning to be, and why they're not telling us this, because it's a good news story and it's really interesting. I'm just kind of like looking at my phone and thinking, oh, I've got a signal, that's weird. So do you know any more about that?
Not other than the headlines, which is the plan is to extend that coverage more generally across the network, and I think they have. I may be wrong, but I think they have publicised it through adverts on the tube. But maybe I'm just more. It catches my eye more obviously. I don't know. It's a definite. It is a planned program of extended coverage.
I think it's something to think about when we talk about information and access to information, particularly if you're suffering from delays or issues in your travel. Actually, the fact that you potentially can use your phone to find out what's happening and plan different routes is a real positive that could be utilised.
Agreed. Thank you. All right. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. And I'm afraid that we stay with you for the next item as well. Although we are now, most of the conversation we've had so far in the board today has been looking backwards. So we're going to kind of at least shift our direction, and we're going to start looking forwards. So the next paper is a paper on our business plan for 2025-26. Now we've had a this is not a cold discussion for the board, because we've had some conversations, actually a super helpful discussion last time, which was quite influential in shaping this paper. So I'll hand to Michael, but I'm hoping that in the discussion we're about to have, you will see some of the reflections that you made last time, in particular about the need to think about a longer term strategy and a year-on-year plan, not to feel you've got to start from scratch every single year. Some of that stuff reflected in the approach that Michael's about to describe to you. Michael.
Yes, thanks, Tricia. I'll try and keep it brief so we can focus more on the discussion.
Yeah.
We have an immediate kind of milestone to meet, which is to submit a proposed business plan in time for the December meeting of the Transport Board Committee for it to hopefully endorse, which they have done in recent years. The intention is to submit a document which essentially adopts the same format as the one used in the last couple of years, and in the pack there was we had a copy of the existing business plan which went a year ago to the committee by way of example. I think the difference will be that within that format we'll try and be a bit more realistic, well, a lot more realistic hopefully, about what it is that we're committing to. I think it's fair to say that, at least in my experience, the format is not what I would think of as a classic business plan. I mean, there are bits, for example, what's your internal strategy about developing the capacity and capability of the organisation? That isn't really the focus of this plan, but it does seem to meet the needs of the committee. And so I guess if you take that as sort of read, what we're looking for today is an endorsement for hopefully the thrust of what's in the paper as being the core content for what will end up being the submission, but recognizing that we will have a job as the team, but with your support, before we get to the end of March next year, we'll have a job to do to flesh out in more detail what is effectively a set of headline propositions. We'll have to flesh that out more detail in terms of what it is we're planning to do, and the milestones for next business year. That is to come. So what we're looking for is your thoughts and hopefully your support for the core content, in the sense of the themes, and we did discuss that last time around, and we've tried to replay that in this paper, but with a tweak. So we've got 8 themes at the moment in our business plan. We're suggesting it should be 7. This is in the spirit of less is more, as it were, but actually the one that we're proposing wouldn't feature, at least explicitly, next time around, is the one around better insight, which feels more like a means to an end rather than necessarily the end in itself. And actually, if what we're doing by being less ambitious in what we do means that we've got more time and resource to do the pieces of research, the pieces of insight better, that will naturally feed into higher quality insight. But are we right to go with the 7 themes that we pretty much said were the right ones last time around? And I'm hoping we will just reconfirm that. But this is the chance to say if people feel otherwise, because there are headline themes that we haven't reflected, which people might think are really important. We don't have a headline theme on a safer transport network, and safety is really important to some people. I'm being devil's advocate. I'm not encouraging you to unpack it. But in the spirit of good governance, let's just check in on that. Yeah. So that's the first one. The second is that for each of the 7 themes that are in this paper, we propose a number of specific deliverables. So it might be a report on a particular issue, or it might be an activity which is about engagement. We just want to make sure that those specifics feel like the right ones from your point of view. But if not, really open to ideas about what might be, a better set of specifics. Again, I think in inviting those thoughts, we're not looking to end up with net more. certainly no more, and actually in the spirit of less is more, if there's anything that people feel around this table, that really doesn't feel like a priority for us, then now's the time to say it. Because I think our instinct is, if anything, we might want to be taking one or two things out, and certainly not adding to the list, maybe replacing if that's felt to be important. And then third, there's a very specific question about the deliverables under inclusion, where we've identified the potential to do another piece of insight for next year around hate crime in its various guises, and the way in which the transport providers have responded to that agenda. But we're also saying that there might be another candidate in the inclusion space, which is around the needs of an increasingly aging population, which is particularly relevant in London. We don't think we've got time for both next year, but we thought it's worth just checking in on whether one of those has a stronger priority. Our preference would be to go for the hate crime one, but again, useful to understand your thoughts. So we welcome your feedback on that. There is work to do after we have this discussion to embed all of your points from this discussion. There are some aspects in this paper which are a little bit underplayed and would need to be beefed up, but not hugely. So bringing to life, what does business as usual mean for us? So we have a busy ongoing stream of work around responding to consultations, or filtering which consultations that we respond to and which ones we don't. There's BAU around our casework, for example. All of that needs to just be explained a little bit more than we've had space to do so in this report. Success factors, we've signaled in this paper, is an area for us to work on. There are two elements to that. One is about medium-term outcomes, and the descriptors around the medium-term outcomes that we have included against each of the priority themes in this paper are really just replaying what we already have identified as those medium-term outcomes, which we did when we were putting more detail on last year's business plan. The bit that's really missing is a definition of what does success look like in year. And some of that I think is relatively straightforward. Some of it's a bit more difficult to do, but we will need to do that, at least by way of example. It might not be the finished article by the time the paper goes to the board, to the Transport Committee, but we would make that very clear to the committee. And we would need to say a little bit more around the budget, where, as you'll have seen, we're looking for essentially the settlement that was made for this year, but with provision for an uplift to cover whatever the Assembly decides it wants to award as an annual pay award. We would just need to unpack why we think that's a responsible way to go forward. And one of the reasons is that although we anticipate we will have some underspend, which we'd like to carry over next year, we will have to absorb some pressures on our costs next year. National insurance contributions, I've estimated what that would be, small double figure thousands for us, potentially. We need to invest in some new IT, so on and so forth. So bits of detail to be fleshed out. But just going back to those prior questions, are the themes the right ones? Are the specifics under each theme the right ones? And then that very particular question around what we do on inclusion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. And just before throwing it open, just to kind of reinforce the point around, when I think in this conversation we can't be looking for and alsos, because the section heads who were in the team meeting a week on Monday know that we would all be collectively shot by by the other people who work in London TravelWatch, who gave us very direct feedback around the realism of our planning. But just in a slightly more control freak tone, I would encourage you to think about the question Michael is posing, not just through the lens of what it is we need to say to the Transport Committee, because that's a moment, it's an important governance moment, but actually I'm as interested in your reflections on planning as a thing and getting from medium-term outcomes to activities, even if not all of that is going to be something that we need to put in the paper for our political masters. So yeah, so you don't feel you need to just think about what we need to say for the committee, think about how we work out what the right thing to do is. And section heads, do you feel you can you're being very quiet down there the table, because this is so important to all of you, so be part of the discussion if you want to. Eddie, thank you.
First, okay, yeah. Yeah, this
This is a really helpful paper, very, very helpful. I agree with doing too much, even now we're still doing too much. And that's just from what I'm picking up.
So I agree.
I agree definitely we should focus on much fewer numbers of research. So we're talking about 2 to 3. But if we read the paper, there's still possibly 4 or 5 in that. So we should be more specific on that, I think, at this stage. I think the priorities for me and the way they're written are a little bit confusing. Presumably, we're going to publish this business plan on our website,
Well,
whether we are or not. The priorities read more like strategic objectives rather than specific priorities to me. And the wording of the priorities didn't necessarily relate to the specifics underneath. So, for example, inclusion, I wouldn't really expect naturally to find digitalisation and personal security.
and
And then leading on to that could be 2 specific pieces of work itself within one priority. So I think we need to narrow down the specifics within each of the priorities.
like that.
And lastly, I agree that hate crime would be my preference to be the priority of the 2 options. Because the transport needs of an ageing population could be met through a number of the other priorities. But hate crime isn't specifically in any of them.
Great, thank you very much. Should we collect a couple of comments before we come back? So really, I think that we're trying to, there's a lot which is bundled under the strategic objectives is a very powerful one. Thank you, Eddie. And there's a vote for hate, covering hate crime as well. Other reflections, Lara?
So I agree with Eddie that it still seems like a lot. It still seems too much. So I definitely would agree that it probably be worth doing another piece of work just to kind of condense it down. Obviously with business plans, if you somehow end up having more time than being freed up, you can then always go back to some of those which were sort of downgraded and decide, oh, we've got capacity to look at those now. I think it'd be better to do it that way around rather than to have too much in the plan to begin with. And then it feels in a sense you're almost starting at a point where you're never going to be able to achieve everything in it. I think in terms specifically of the inclusion of the hate crime or the needs of an ageing population, I have a conflict of interest. I'm chair of an ever local AGK, so my preference would be for the needs of an ageing population. However, I'm conscious that that might be work that's being carried out by others, so I think it'd be worth having a look to see if, for example, in your sort of engagement with other stakeholders such as AGK, whether or not there's existing work happening, in which case then I don't think it would be right for us to work in that space. And then I think hate crime would be fine, but my preference is for the former. And then finally on the in-year success measures, I think it'd be interesting to think about to whom, so who are the stakeholders to whom we'd be thinking about the success measures referring to, and I wonder if that might help in terms of helping us to clarify some of the examples. Would it be for passengers or for those using services, or is it in terms of how it's viewed by the transport committee or another stakeholder? I think they might be different types of measure.
And that relates back to the organisational success factors feedback that's coming from the board member reviews. But yeah, thank you very much. Rick, did you want to?
I haven't really got great insights to add, but I'll say something anyway. I guess one thing is the first 4 are kind of like clearly a kind of outcome. The description of them as more outcomes, whereas 5, 6, and 7 are more about what you're doing. I was priority 6, maybe also just thinking about not just the transport committee, but kind of political support, I guess, because if you want to kind of bundle pieces of work under the priorities, it might be that actually that becomes more important, like with rail reform going through policy development and then legislation. But it also might be things like the kind of boroughs. Whether I think you have some engagement with boroughs. So the bus report was around kind of like the need for kind of better priority measures. And I think boroughs are kind of, they vary in their support for bus lanes. I don't, not all boroughs enforce bus lanes, is that right?
I think it's a very, very mixed picture.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But that would be adding to the work. to try and influence political leadership in boroughs. But I thought generally it looks good to me, and it's good to have the continuity from this year's work as well. I always kind of like probably cram plans with too much work. Because, and then in some ways, I suppose it's just about how you manage that through the year and what are the priorities, because you want to have something that kind of not, I suppose it's about whether your planning is to describe everything you do or the strategic, the most important strategic things you want to do as well. So this is sort of maybe somewhere in between those two things. It probably should be describing everything you're doing, I would have thought, in order to be able to help explain to people what London TravelWatch is about.
Yeah. Brilliant. So there's really clear feedback there. That's super helpful. Yeah, the comprehensive. I think there is a point of reflection of whether there is still too much, or whether there's some advantage in that. But can I just add a couple of thoughts from me and then come back to you, Michael? So and these are reflecting on what people have said. So there are some planning comments as well as some plan comments, and I was very aware of what Lara said, I think last time we met, which is that in getting from the outcomes through to the things we want to do, is there an opportunity to engage people we're trying to support? So it's can we create the space to engage our users in our planning as well as just writing our plan, which I think that's what you said. I think you said that. Sounds like you. It was very good. I was very impressed at the time. And then there's the second thing, which I'd love us to find the time to do, and this is our feedback on what everybody's saying about workload, is I think one thing that I've observed this year is that it's been difficult to find the space to do partnering as well as you might do, just because there's been so much to do. I'm glad to see Alex nodding at that. So when we're thinking about how we do things, I mean, hate crime is a brilliant example of that. I'm sure, I know that there is work going on in many, many organisations on hate crime, including the British Transport Police that I sit on the authority of. So thinking about the landscape before defining the products for that would be a really sensible thing to do. So just capturing some of those, how we do the activity, as well as what are the topics, I think would be a sensible thing to do. But there's a lot in there. Michael, reflections back?
Very happy to try and take some stuff out.
Yes.
I mean, the themes are, so they're priority themes, perhaps that's a better way of describing them, under which we anticipate a number of products, outputs, and that's what the bit of text under each of the priority theme headings tries to do. So I think, I mean, we can bring that out a little bit more clearly, but I think the consensus I felt from last time around was that the themes are the right ones. So my instinct is stick with those, maybe just explain that they are themes. Very happy for us to have a think about winnowing out the deliverables that sit underneath those themes. I'm going to put them on the spot, but I did ask Susan, Alex, and Sonia whether before this meeting, if they had to choose to take anything out, what is it they would take out? So I'd be interested if they had a chance to do that. I've got my own. I've got my thought, but I'm not gonna. I don't want to.
So Susan, Alex, and Sonia, what would you like to take out?
Thank you for that. Well, first of all, I mean, one of the things I would want to say is that when we have too much of a packed plan, it can obviously negatively affect staff as well. If you can't deliver it, then it can really negatively affect them. And also things happen throughout the year. Euston being one of them, where we really need our voice to be heard, and we need the space and time to do that. Maybe we could plan for, if we've got time towards the end of the year, we could do this if nothing else comes up. So, but because of one of the priorities of mine, I wouldn't want to say what others we could take out. I think that would just be mean. Yeah.
Alex, so Eddie, I think, has slightly skewered you slightly on his apologies on it, but the accessibility one is a really good example of where you've got a theme that has multiple different activities and products sitting underneath it. So, I mean, I think the direct challenge, which is a really good one, is all that actually doable, without having some of the negative impacts that Susan just rightly highlighted.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the accessibility priority, and something that I've definitely felt this year as well, there's quite a few things in there which are quite reliant on external organisations, which always makes it kind of hard to put in there, or not necessarily to put in there, but I mean, there's things that have been delayed or haven't happened just because they've not been published by others, so it's hard for us to act. So I don't know if there's something around that. I think as well, so it's a bit loose at the moment, but around the equity in motion programme and whatever comes out of the London Assembly's Transport Committee inquiries into accessibility and inclusion, so a bit of a mouthful. I think with them, and again, I think this is a learning from this year, keen to make sure if there is anything that we take out of that, it's very strategic, but also maybe clear and discreet. It's not kind of like, oh, we're going to take all of this forward, like picking a few areas, I guess similar to the spotlight things where we might actually have a tangible impact, as opposed to trying to do everything, which is I think maybe what we've fallen into that trap a little bit before. So that's not actually taking anything out.
No, that's okay. I think we don't need to necessarily do it in the room, although I'd be really interested in Sonia's reflections as well. But we can, I think if the sense of the conversation is, for really good reasons, there's still a bit too many activities bundled under the individual themes, and taking out one of the themes hasn't quite been, I think we should, that's a big takeaway. But Sonia, what do you think?
I think the kind of grey one for me is probably the seamless journeys one, which I know we discussed a lot in the last meeting, but I still kind of look at it and don't really know what we want out of it at the end. And I think I'm sort of thinking of it obviously from a comms point of view, and I just can't see it with that one. And I don't know whether that just needs to be really narrowed down and two specific, elements sort of pulled out, so it's a little bit more focused, because I still feel that that's the one where I feel, that it lacks that bit of focus, I think.
Yeah, we definitely had a really powerful discussion last time, which encouraged the team to think about specific things rather than necessarily avoiding the ocean. Okay. Michael, does that give you what you need to do two things? One is to have a product which can get to the assembly, but also to get the next steps in the planning going forward. I think what the group is really encouraging is very much a disciplined, less is more, don't be afraid to take on individual activities while supporting the themes and the structure of the plan.
Yes, I think we've got what we need to do. I think in the spirit of less is more, just as an example, under inclusion, and unfortunately I didn't come back to Eddie's point on that, but maybe we can just park that for the moment. But on inclusion, I think effectively we are saying we would only do one bit of genuine new insight, and it feels like hate crime as the topic would be the one. So I think that's one that naturally, as a result of this conversation, we're already kind of saying push something aside. We're a bit more focused. We'll try and adopt that approach with some of the others. With some of the others, I think we are just genuinely at a point in the year where we don't actually know what the thing might be, but we feel that, for example, on accessibility, it would be odd for us not in some way to be trying to add some value in that space, because it's just such a hot topic, and we need to use the next 3 months to bring more specificity to that point, but we're just not in a position to do it. So it's almost like a placeholder. We will do something in this theme, but what that thing is at the moment, is to be confirmed. But in the spirit of not trying to take on a huge project across all 7 of the themes, it needs to be proportionate.
Okay.
But I think we've got enough to do what we need to, certainly to meet the needs of the committee. There is then quite a lot to do then to convert that into something more like a planning process that kind of fleshes some of this stuff out.
And just to kind of summarize, I think where I think I am on the process as opposed to the product. So what does good look like moving forward? So listening to Susan's point, good looks like having a plan where people believe it's realistic and think it's deliverable and won't feel stressed when they look at it. It's a good start. And then, which I think, as you said, builds on the work we've done before and makes good use of existing products that we've got, which I think you've built in already, where we understand the landscape and can partner effectively. And if possible, this again, Laura's point from the last meeting, where we have an opportunity to test what we're doing with our users before we do it, then we can do that. So I think there are some things that for the next steps in the work, if we've got a bit of headspace, we can pick up. But I think that gets us where we need to for today. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Very helpful guidance. Okay, so now we're doing okay actually, and I was anxious that we would struggle to keep up with the pace we've set, but we're doing well. So we now have our series of reports, our regular reports on casework, campaigns, comms, and finance. And Susan, you get to go first. Thank you very much for your always incredibly informative report.
Thank you. Obviously, I take the report as read. There's just a couple of, I've asked a couple of questions, and I just want to give just a little bit more background on both of them. So the first question I've asked of members is, so there is discussion at the moment for ticket retailers to come within the scope of the Rail Ombudsman. However, it would have to be voluntary. So we would probably find ourselves in a position where some ticket retailers choose not to, and some do. And I was just wondering what members felt about that, whether it should be, we should be encouraging that approach, or whether we should be saying, well, it's got to be all or nothing, because otherwise, passengers are going to be put even more in limbo than they are now. Because at the moment, we are the appeals body, London TravelWatch Transport Focus, the appeals body for people who want to complain about ticket retailers. So whereas I agree, we'd all agree that they should go into scope for the Rail Ombudsman, but should it be, because it's going to be voluntary, should it be all or nothing, or do we think it's okay that some go and some don't?
That's a question. So operators have to opt into the Ombudsman as well, don't they? So that's
the licensed,
not all operators are.
Licensed operators have to be within scope.
So for the operators, it's compulsory.
Yeah, yeah. But because a ticket retailer isn't a service provider, they are just a provider of tickets. So they're a retailer for all intents and purposes. That's what the difference is. So I'll ask that question first.
I was going to ask, do we know what they're planning to do, whether they're planning to opt in or not?
We don't know. I mean, it would be down to, because it's completely voluntary, some ticket retailers may just say no, because obviously there's cost attached. When appeals come to us, there's no cost attached to the ticket retailer, but to go to an ombudsman, there would be a cost attached.
Like, in the absence of any other thoughts in the room, I can't see the downside of allowing them to do it on a voluntary basis. I think if some of them are really teeny tiny, and if you stopped some of the big ones doing it because some of the small ones didn't want to, I'm not sure that would be, I don't know, does that make sense?
Could you have a reserve power in the new bill to the Secretary of State could force them to, if they don't opt into the scheme, and if it causes problems? It's
because they're not a service provider.
Yeah.
So there is a retail ombudsman. It's actually the same ombudsman that does the rail, but it's just a separate part of their business. But all retailers opt in. You can't. There is no compulsory. So if you did it for ticket retailers, then you'd be looking at it would be for retailers. So that's where it starts to become. It's not that straightforward. And I think the question I'm asking is, are we okay for some passengers to be able to access the Rail Ombudsman and some not, because the people they bought the ticket from?
Yeah. Lara?
In principle, no.
Okay.
I'm not happy with it.
Yeah.
But pragmatically, I think we probably need to take the approach that means that the most number of passengers have the opportunity to access the Rail Ombudsman. I also do wonder whether or not there's something about publicising which retailers use a scheme and which don't, because as a consumer myself, I'd like to know so that then I can make an informed decision about whether or not I want to use them. And I mean, the prices aren't that different between the different retailers. To be at the moment, a lot of them use things like, you know, split ticketing and that kind of thing. So I would then probably choose the one where I know I've got a backstop over another one.
I think that's super helpful. Thank you. I mean, the train line is 90% of the business, isn't it?
It is a very large
So
proportion.
if
of
the train line's
business.
in, then that gets you on people, doesn't it?
But it might be that because remember there could be a cost implication.
Yeah.
So if they do go to the rail ombudsman, they could put their additional costs onto that to cover. So you know, it could be that you might find it cheaper to go to a ticket retailer where we remain the appeals body.
I like Lara's. I think Lara's
Yeah.
formulation of our position is brilliant. So, like, what we would like would be for everybody to have the same access to the ombudsman, but we're not going to stand out against more people having access to the ombudsman to take that purist position. Does that work?
Yeah.
Susan looks as you're comfortable. With
Yeah,
that.
very comfortable.
Yeah,
very, very
okay,
comfortable with
yeah.
that. Thank you.
Great.
And that point about making it clear to
Yes,
in
I'm
some way,
trying
in the
to-
right
yes,
way,
transparency,
that we are covered by the ombudsman or we're not,
Right.
because I think that creates some opportunity for pressure
Brilliant.
from customers.
Thank you.
The other question I had, and this has come up via casework, it doesn't happen very often, but we've had a passenger who has complained to their caseworker that we don't understand the Equality Act in detail. Now, we're not specialists in any particular subject. I wouldn't actually say jack of all trades, but we know a bit about quite a lot. And I think if my personal belief is if we had to be trained in one very specific area, then it would take away our ability to be able to jump between different subjects and just have a high level knowledge. But because it's quite a difficult topic, it's not something that I feel comfortable to go back to any passenger and say, no, we're not going to train our staff to do that. I think it needs to be a bit more, have a more of a discussed point.
Can you say a little bit more about the context there? So, no, actually, maybe not. Maybe we don't. Sorry, I'm wondering about kind of privacy of the person's information, and it's probably not a good idea to bring into the room the precise story.
Is this a question of degree, Susan? Because we obviously need to have, or the team needs to have some level of understanding, but beyond a certain level, the question is that necessary?
Well, the other thing we have to remember is their understanding is all self-taught. We don't teach our caseworkers anything of this at all. So it's everything they have grasped themselves with experience, talking to me, obviously Mags as the senior caseworker, but we have no training in this, although we have no training in the Consumer Act either. So, you know, it's what we know to take it forward. And I'm comfortable saying to a passenger, we don't have that level of experience, the same as we can't do injury cases because it's a very specialised area with insurance. So my team, we could so easily make it so much worse for people, so we just don't get involved at all. But it's just, this is, I mean, and this is one question, Jimmy, should we know more about this? Should we know more about more things like, the Consumer Act and, you know, all these different acts to be able to effectively represent passengers who come to us for help?
I would guess you need to be careful about not providing legal advice.
Yes.
In the same way, like not providing financial advice. So that would be a caveat. But I guess it would be useful in terms of the general training of all staff to understand the Equality Act for transport, but not necessarily specifically that you're providing that kind of legal. You need to make sure you're not providing that legal advice about what the Equality Act means in this particular case.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you in this particular example, it is what this person expected us that was quite detailed, and it took me a long time to go off and find it and find what it meant. But it's and it's not only knowing the act, it's whether or not we could use that information to challenge an operator. So there's a lot in the Consumer Rights Act that we can't use to challenge, because the only place it can be challenged is in court. It can't be challenged by us or through a customer service kind of environment. But it's just how much should we know, because obviously this is a subject that's coming up more and more now with people.
Michael, you have thought on this?
So we haven't discussed this at length, but my instinct is there is a certain level of understanding that we should have, and that it should be formally trained, as it were, in some way.
Yeah.
Not just equality. You mentioned Consumer Act. I mean, there might be a number of other areas to look at. So I think, one, should we do some sort of formal training around that? Yes. Two, I'm just wondering whether there's, can we phone a friend? Is there an organisation that provides a similar sort of service, some sort of analogue, where caseworkers are, having to have a base level of knowledge in a certain number of fields? Is there someone we could talk to kind of get some insight into what's the right level and what's the right breadth of coverage? And then third, we need to kind of source some outside support, some online training, whatever. I mean, what's partly going through my mind is that in my experience as a school governor, although I'm not an expert in the Equality Act, I have to know what being a school governor means in terms of compliance with the Equality Act and lots of other bits of legislation. And although it's not a perfect analogy for the work of the caseworkers, if they're engaging with the public around issues that the public have about the way they've been treated, I think they need some basic training. It's just trying to get a handle on, well, what's the right level.
Yeah, and it also needs to be updated regularly as well, because this is something that changes quite a lot. And yeah, it is challenging. It is challenging for us to understand. I mean, basically, we look at it at the moment from what the passenger is saying, what the TOC has said in response, and then is that reasonable? Has everything been considered, and can we take the next step? But sometimes I think we have opportunities for challenge, but the caseworker is almost flailing because they're thinking, I don't know enough to actually make that challenge quite strong.
Yeah. So I think there's three things. Sorry, did you go?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all,
I think it's absolutely essential that everybody at London TravelWatch undertakes training on the Equality Act. If that's not already happening at any level at all, it'd be good to understand what training does take place, just so that we can understand as a board what training staff get.
and
that links into the EDI strategy, which Michael mentioned in his report, because I know you're going to look at that in the new year, but could we have sight of that before then? Just so we can start to think about what's in there and what needs to be developed. But also that jumps into the risk assessment. So number 6 is around diversity and inclusion. Absolutely crucial that everybody is trained on the Equality Act and has some level of understanding about the protected characteristics. That's not to say that anybody needs to be an expert. So for example, Susan, in that case you're talking about, there's so many specialist external organisations, as Michael said, that you can tap into as a sounding board for a second piece of advice to help you in your job and the rest of the team. You're not expected to be an expert.
Yeah. And that was kind of where I was going as well. Eddie, thank you. So yeah, I think I mean, many of us around the table are involved in other organisations where part of the mandatory learning package includes basic information about the Equalities Act, and there are many ways in which that's offered, and it can be really, it's not expensive and it can be straightforward. So I sort of agree with Eddie, we should be looking at that as part of our, what's our L&D ask as a whole for our people. So I think that the sort of sense of the conversation, well, Rick's words of wisdom are well taken about not becoming and offering legal advice, that we should be making sure that people have a good understanding of relevant equalities legislation through mandatory learning, and we should understand, as Michael said, where to go if we do need more expert support. And we'll come back to, I think the other takeaway is let's come back to the EDI strategy more generally when we have probably at our January meeting. Thank you. All right, anything else, Susan? We went through both your questions.
Thank you very
That's a
much.
good
That's actually
start.
really helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, next is campaigns and advocacy, Alex. We've talked about a bit about some of your stuff already.
I know, it might be short. Take the paper as read, but well, one big update since that paper was drafted is that the bus report, as Tricia mentioned earlier, has finally gone out. So that went out last Thursday. Generally have had positive response so far, particularly from the assemblies and very kind words, and they're looking at how they can take forward those recommendations and help support it. And also really good, big thanks to Sonia and Luke. I think really positive response on social media, and I'm talking about that, so I won't say too much about that. I had an issue, obviously TFL at the big one, so having an initial casual chat tomorrow with the stakeholder team, but with a view to setting up a more formal, higher level conversation to talk about how we can take that forward. But initial response is positive. A thank you as well for people in the definitely some people in the room as well, but we are doing the digital inclusion mystery shopping at the moment, so thank you to everyone who has helped with that. Looking at Rick, because I know you've just done some of yours, and definitely some interesting findings. I think it's also a good reminder why being out on the network and kind of looking at these things, I know I've definitely spotted some things that I don't think I would probably have noticed otherwise. So I think that'll be a good bit of work. If you have any questions around that as well, just let me know. And then also just it is noted in the report, but around the futures work, which we're looking at doing with Transport Focus, just to say, so that has been put on pause for now, just while they look at capacity, we look at capacity and kind of do other bits and pieces. But have got a meeting in the calendar in December, basically to check in and see where we are, if that's something that we can take forward. No worries if there aren't any initial thoughts, but did have a question. It would be useful to kind of get the board's view on that. If it turns out in December they don't have capacity, is that something that we take forward anyway, or pause, or kind of basically views on the importance of that work, just given everything else that's going on as well. But those are the main things for me. Obviously as well, any other thoughts are very important.
Thank you. Any reflections for Alex?
I was just going
I was just going to ask you about the personal security summit, just interested in that because I've not seen much about it. I was wondering, is it a public meeting? Is it a closed meeting? What's the expectation? What numbers are you going to have at it?
Yeah, so it is a closed meeting, invite only, being hosted at TFL's offices in Stratford. I'm happy to pull this as well and send a note around after if that'd be useful. So at the moment, I can't remember the exact number, but we've got about 120 people signed up. So obviously they might not all turn up, but hopefully a big event, and they are a mix of obviously sort of people from transport industry, so TFL. We've also invited TOCs, so they're kind of got a spread of them attending, the mayor's office and the policing authorities community. And then potentially most importantly, sort of community groups, people with lived experience, so that they can share their experiences and provide insight and input. Because I think one of the key things is industry could work together better, basically. And also, you know, there's no point in people duplicating slightly different campaigns. Can we kind of work together? But obviously to do that, they really need the insight from the people who it impacts, and people with that specialist knowledge. So it's an opportunity for them to share that as well, to make sure that, you know, whatever is created or produced does actually help people and improve personal security. So yes, it should be quite a big event. Sasha's been working very hard on it at the moment, but yeah, happy to put that in a note and send that around after this.
Thank you.
Is there, I mean, and then Michael and I are both going. Is there an opportunity for board members to attend if they want to?
Yeah, I think so. I'll take
check.
that. Yeah.
Take that
So
away.
they don't want 100% commit, but I imagine
Yes.
that would be possible. So yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's worth emphasising that I guess the main aim of it was to bring together the players within the transport industry in London to say, you know, what are you doing on the back of the various reports that we've published over the last 2 or 3 years on personal security. So the personal security report, the report around the LGBTQ+ community and their needs, for example.
Yeah.
We did a scorecard also last summer on what on how well we thought individual operators were doing. So this is really a kind of like call to arms, and a chance for providers and community groups and others to hopefully agree what is it that needs to be done that isn't being done at the moment.
Thank you very much. Lara?
On your question about the work with Transport Focus, I was curious what you think about if they don't have capacity in December, what would your recommendation be?
I mean, I think there's probably I think we could probably still take something forward, but I think it would probably be in a different format and maybe a slightly different scale. So open to thoughts from Trisha and Michael on that. I think sort of from the conversations that we had before it was put on pause, obviously it was kind of trying to find a topic that was useful and relevant for both organisations. And that might be, if we're not working with them on it, there could be something that's potentially a bit more pertinent to London specifically, so it could shift that focus. So I think, maybe we'd just look a bit different, and then also that would reduce capacity a little bit. So thinking about that, but I think there could still be something. Obviously, don't plan too much because they might be happy to go ahead with it. But yeah,
I mean, I've been very diplomatic. You're very diplomatic because I've been pushing this quite hard. But we do keep struggling to articulate, because I do believe at a kind of high level that consumer-focused organisation needs to think about them in the future as well as right now. In transport, those are decisions that you take now which will shape the future. But getting from that like totally vague observation to a set of things we might do with Transport Focus has been quite hard, right? And I'm hearing really the conversation we had about being disciplined about the work program. So it's if we're struggling to work out what good looks like, we have been struggling. It does sort of make me think about priorities in relation to some of the other things where we know what good looks like and we're clear what we have to do. So like despite my huge enthusiasm for something future based on our work program, I might have to just suck it up a little bit.
I'm going to be more direct. I'm going to say nothing's going to happen this year.
No.
And just being honest, because A, it's been difficult to specify what it is, but B, and it's partly what's on Alex's patch otherwise, but also like we want to do a survey of Londoners on their priorities. We need to get on with that before the end of the year. We're going to do 2 stakeholder events, one on seamless journeys, one on customer care. We're talking about a piece of research on value for money from using public transport. Those feel much crunchier, and just dealing with those is going to delivering those is going to be hard. So if I'm honest, I think we just need to cut our losses. We need to come back to this issue about what's the future look like and what are the big issues. Absolutely super important. But I think,
Agree.
You've got the external speaker ideas on the agenda, so that might be the way to go.
Oh, let's come back to that. That's
you're obviously thinking
on the money. All right, let's move on before I cry. Anything else for Alex? Thank you. Well done again, Alex. And well done, Sonia. It's a kind of everybody had to do an awful lot last weekend. You worked very well, so thank you for keeping going.
Soldiered on through COVID
Well done.
to get the report done. But yeah, all good. So taking the report as read, obviously, but I just wanted to update on a few things that weren't in the report due to timings of when the paper was submitted. One thing that I've mentioned is around social media advertising, and actually this week we've started experimenting a little bit with that. So we put a little bit of spend on our social media channels specifically to boost the bus report. And I'm talking like 15 quid on the channel here. So it's like small change kind of amounts, but actually even just that very little amount, you immediately do see a spike in engagement. How meaningful that is remains to be seen, but it's quite interesting to see how just a small amount can help. So I think just doing a small experiment will enable us sort of longer term to see what we can do in terms of sort of raising awareness and engagement, whether it's on specific issues or more generally. So I'll definitely be doing a lot more research and work around that in the future. So a couple of big things last week. One was our newsletter went out with a survey. We've had about 160 responses so far, which isn't enormous, but it's quite significant as well. I'm going to send out a little reminder later in the week as well, so hopefully that will get a bit of a boost. Once the survey closes, I'll put together the results and share that with everyone, just because I think it's always quite interesting to see what people have to say. The areas of interest so far are definitely around engineering works, and strikes and changes to services. So that seems to be the key kind of areas that people are interested in, along with concerns around delays and overcrowding. So those are the kind of key things. Interestingly, cost and accessibility were not biggest priorities for that group, which is quite interesting. So some of those little findings might be quite interesting and useful sort of moving forward. We also had a, quite stupidly possibly, I think this was your suggestion, Susan, so I'll leave you to collate.
You're being set up.
We had an open space for people to just put any other comments, which obviously people have taken us up on. And it's really interesting, but I think what I've noticed so far is the comments are really mixed. So there's not a real obvious kind of set of things that people are saying. There's quite a bit of stuff around buses, but generally it's a very mixed bag of stuff. So it'd be something interesting for us to look through at some point. Also, last week, as Alex has mentioned, the bus report went out. We've had some good coverage. It was on the homepage of the Standard website almost immediately as soon as it went out. Plus, there was an opinion piece, which I think was quite interesting. I think whether we want to do this or not, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure if we follow up with them again, I think they'd probably do more on it. They're really, really interested. So there's some opportunities there. We've got a page on the website, a dedicated campaign page that's already had about 800 visits in less than a week, which is pretty good. And social media engagement's been really positive as well. So we're going to keep pushing the report throughout the next 2-3 weeks. We've got some little videos and graphics and bits and pieces we're pushing out on social. So please carry on sharing as much as you can. It's much appreciated. And hopefully today, touch wood, I'll be ordering some printed copies. So hopefully next time you guys are here or we have a board meeting, we'll be able to hand those out, which would be quite nice to have some physical copies of those. I'm going to whiz through some of the rest. Obviously, in terms of media coverage, Euston was massive in October. I think what's quite interesting, we had tons of coverage, but then once we sort of became involved in the discussions, we started to turn down a lot of requests. But it was really interesting to see just how many journalists were coming to us for comments. It's, you know, sometimes a shame to have to say no, but I think it's really good to see that we were definitely like the go-to place for people to come for comments. So that was really good. And we also had covered in a few other areas. So I'm going to whiz right down now just to the discussion point at the end, because I'm really interested to get your views. I've been working on our brand guidelines as they're a little bit out of date and we've got a few different documents. I'm trying to pull everything together. And I was just really interested if anyone had any views on the brand generally, strengths and weaknesses. One of the things I'm looking at is the colour palette, which I know to some people seems a bit like, why does this matter? But at the moment we have tons and tons of different colours, which is actually quite unhelpful. So making sure that the colours we use are more accessible and that we can use them a bit more effectively. I think one of the things that's quite interesting is our logo. A lot of company logos have a little icon or a graphic or a squiggle or a something in it that you can then take out and use. And we don't have that at all. So I'm not suggesting we change the logo, but do we need to kind of add something else to identify us? So yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts. I don't know how interested everyone is in branding and stuff, which, yeah, it is interesting, I think, obviously. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any comments around what we do well, what we could do better. Are there things we need to change or evolve or adapt? It'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Should we do, let's do the interesting branding question first, and then we can ask, and then because you've left us with that, and then come back to anything else on your report.
Yeah, for sure. I have also added just something around tone of voice as well, which is just, I'm almost kind of brainstorming to myself here, but are these the kind of right, you know, is this the right vibe, or do we need to be thinking about something completely different? Don't know if anyone has any.
I think. Ignore me. Well, I mess up the IT.
Oh dear.
For the next item.
Eddie.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
Starting off then on the website, the branding logo, I'm just very conscious that a lot of work has gone into websites and branding, etc. That's always the case.
So I don't want
So I don't want to upset anyone, any work that has gone on for anybody around the table. But I don't like the website. I don't like the branding. It's very old school. It's quite boring.
Sure, a lot.
Sure, a lot of effort went into it at the time, but it's really time for a complete refresh, I think.
Keep
I
pushing
wasn't-
at that door.
yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
ajar.
You're
It's very-
not getting any pushback from the round table.
Yeah, and as I wasn't involved, I'm not upset at all. So
Yeah.
keep it coming. It's absolutely fine. I do agree. I think even weird things like just the use of like all capital letters in the logo, it sounds silly again, and I know a lot of people don't think about it, but even that is quite old-fashioned and sort of unfriendly almost. So yeah, look, there's a lot of things that I think we could change. It depends how much we want to kind of push it, but yeah, there's definitely room to maneuver, and I do agree. I think things like the website, you know, Laura, you're looking at it now, but that banner's like really dark. Why would you have that tint on there? So these are things I kind of skipped over the website bit, but I am going to be working with the web developers to kind of make some changes to just things like that to make the website a little bit fresher and a bit brighter. So yeah, I definitely take that on board.
And it's very, very complicated. It's much more complex. It takes you too many clicks to get to what really matters.
Yeah.
The way it's all categorized is not very intuitive. There's plenty of work to do.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, Laura?
Completely agree with not a big fan of the website. And also, but I think that refreshing it and thinking about the digital strategy needs to be part of a broader piece of work.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of struck by things like the page views and what people are clicking on for our website. It's a little random, and I don't know the extent to which it's useful that at least they're coming to our website, but then I don't know what data we collect on when they then go on from there. Do they then go into pages which are more relevant to what we do, or is it they're just looking for travel information, and because we're coming up on Google search, they're clicking for that and then they're clicking back
elsewhere.
off, in which case it's not super useful. And so I think that needs to be part of the strategy around sort of, you know, making the website more attractive, more user friendly, more modern and up to date. And then I definitely agree with, think, you know, restricting the color palette is better. It kind of just looks clearer and sharper and easier to read. And more accessible. Those are the main things. Oh yes, the other thing is, obviously, I know we talked a bit at the last meeting about who gets a newsletter and who's part of our like digital champions. Again, I think that should be part of this wider strategy, because I don't know what the exact demographics are of the current people who are on it, but if we're looking to expand it out, then we obviously need to think about what they're looking for and what different groups are looking for, and whether or not changing the way we're presenting our content will it alienate our existing kind of users without sort of expanding our reach.
Would you any on this one?
Just linking it to what you were saying earlier about kind of like clarifying the TravelWatch's mission. So kind of like that should be helpful. So that's linked to kind of the brand value proposition type approach, and then flows from it, and then also kind of like the different audiences that we have and their kind of user journey as well. Stuff, which I'm sure you're thinking about, and just being clear about that, because I guess in some ways you kind of like want to talk to, we want to talk to the public at large for them to understand what the TravelWatch is and how we can help them if they have issues and try and improve their lives traveling around London. But we also want to talk to policy type audiences, political type audiences as well, who may want different kind of content, and they may look for the website, for example, in different ways to try and have that information.
Now I'm working on a wider comms plan, and the vision and mission bit is obviously really at the core of that, because I think everything we do needs to always kind of refer back to that. So so that's an important part of that work for sure.
Thank you. So lots of support around the room, but also kind of a sort of scratchiness as well, which is great, which is what we want. I mean, I think that I like the words. It's worth checking, if you haven't already had a chance to do that, checking that in with the words that we came up with at the away day when we were doing the mission exercise. So Susan, there was a lot of the team put a lot of words up on a board, and these it'd be worth cross-checking the tone of voice things of what's coming from everybody. I think that would be really good. Fab. All right. Well, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
well done.
Can I ask
Oh, of course, yeah.
Another issue on the report itself, just going back to the newsletter sign up. I think there might have been a misunderstanding about what I said at the last meeting, so I wasn't suggesting that we just opt everybody into the newsletter, because that wouldn't be good at all, absolutely. I was suggesting, but I might not have come across like this, that we be transparent about it. And the newsletter sign up is part of the core offer through the casework. So people don't have to be signed up if they don't want to, and they can opt out of that. But it's a fantastic opportunity for all that traffic coming through casework to be invited to register for the newsletter.
Yeah, that's what
I was suggesting, so being open and transparent about it. And I'm sure because we're going to get more members that way, it's going to be easier for them to agree to it at that point. And then they can opt out of it if they're not happy. I was just struck by some of the feedback Susan and her team are getting from people, particularly the negative feedback. And I hope that's not very disheartening for teams, because there's a lot of positive feedback there. And you'll always find that the people who are most upset or angry are the ones that are more vocal. But there's a few people that don't understand who London TravelWatch are and what we do and what the purpose of it is. So that newsletter is a good channel to get that awareness out.
Yeah, totally, 100%. Yeah. Susan and I have had these discussions around the best way to do this. It's not a simple answer, unfortunately. And
yeah, it's because my team work on behalf of Transport Focus as well. So everything we do for two organisations. We can't do it separately because of I can just see the errors happening for that now. But there may be a way that we do it maybe at a survey stage where we could kind of more target people, perhaps, particularly those who are very happy with us. They may be very willing to join up. So there is possibilities, but that just kind of reduces the amount of people we will reach. It would be better to do them as they come into the organisation, but there's no way to separate them between Transport Focus and London TravelWatch at that stage. At the moment,
it's a helpful clarification, and it's definitely not. It's not triggering the data protection anxieties that we might have thought. So let's keep it as a goal, and think about how we might make it work in practice. Thank you very much, Sonia. Actually, apologies for keeping you waiting in the virtual room, but it's time for your bit now. So halfway through the year now, finance report.
Thank you. Okay, I think it's at this stage in here, there's not really a massive amount to kind of highlight at this point. We're largely in line with forecast, both year to date and where we're expecting to be at year end. The main area we've got some headroom is on staff costs. There's £41,000 has been identified there, largely a result of the vacancies earlier in the year, both on the staff side and for board members. This has now been assumed to be transferred to the reserves. We're not sort of expecting to spend this anywhere. So that should kind of leave us with a reserve balance at the end of the year of just around about £150,000. That's the anticipated level. And I guess the rest of the spend we're expecting to be as planned.
Michael, did you want to add anything? So I think Eddie rightly gave us a bit of a challenge at the last meeting around forecasting to the budget. And I think we've picked that up in this month's cycle. But Michael, was there anything that you wanted to draw out, or?
Yeah, we thought Eddie had a good point.
Yeah, I think we did think Eddie had a good point.
And so we've tried to reflect the spirit of that in the release of the understanding that we've that Shahid's just referred to. So I guess in a nutshell, we're in a good position in the sense that we're living within our means, but as always, having a healthy underspend begs questions about our planning, about our ability to deliver. I don't think it's a major issue, and does create some opportunity in that we can hopefully use that headroom next year. If it remains. Other than that, nothing for me to add.
Great. I'm not seeing any further comments. Oh, Eddie, go.
Thanks a lot for the update. It's really helpful. One specific thing about training and development. So we had £25,000 budgeted. Is that right? And we've only spent 1,000. Is that right? Just picking up on the discussion about the Equality Act training and other areas we might want to be focusing on developing. So have we got quite a healthy budget there to spend?
So
other question is, we not spend anything on project costs apart from 9,000 on inclusion to date?
Yeah, on the training side, a good spot, and we've got a number of training modules identified for the rest of this year, which will use up all of that money. But we need to think about how we take up the Equality Act conversation, whether we can do it this year or possibly more likely next business year. Project costs, do you want to say anything on that side?
No, I think as it was last year, it's going to be a bit end heavy, the spread. As Michael mentioned, we've got a few quite chunky projects that are in the works at the moment. Just putting together the project, well, not the project plans, but the sort of the tenders for them to go out. So I think that will largely go out. There are a few bits and pieces. So I think, for example, there was a little bit of budget for the futures work, which I guess now might not be used for that, that we could potentially shift around. But otherwise, I think the plan will probably be to put them into the reserves.
Sort of question actually on the for the bus report and the work that was done by Yonder. Was the cost of that, did that fall last year or is it supposed to fall this year?
Yes, it did fall. Well, so the bulk of it fell last year. There are a few bits and pieces which are going to be invoiced very shortly. But yeah, the bulk of that was last year. It's just taking a while to actually get the report out.
Right. Okay. So I think perhaps when we budgeted, we might have assumed that some of that cost is going to fall this year. So there might be some there to release.
Yes, I think we've got a little bit of budget in there as well for well, for the get the thing up, but for the other spotlight reports, potentially do some focus groups and things like that if that's done the same pot, and also potentially a small roundtable session or something with boroughs and TfL to follow up on the bus report. But yeah, there might be some underspending.
Great. I mean, it's obviously better. Like I think we had I think before this group of board members joined, we did have a medium-term objective of having a healthier reserve. So in some ways, it's good that we are getting closer to have a healthier reserve, and that'll give us some resilience if there are challenges next year. Beyond that, it is good. It would be better to spend the money we set at the beginning of the year, but this has been an unusual year with 2 elections and staff vacancies. So we'll be keeping a close eye on it over the rest of the year. Thank you, Sinead. Super helpful as ever. I don't think anything else, so thanks very much for your help, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Grand. So, colleagues, we're in our last 10 minutes. So, the next thing is our risk register. And I think, Michael, I'm coming back to you to take us through what have we done since the conversation we had last time.
Thank you. So on the register, we have a new risk, which is risk 1, which specifically refers to the possible proposals for a passenger standards authority and the impact it might have on us. We had previously referred to that as part of the risk that's around the relationship between us and London TravelWatch, but when Trish and I had a conversation about it, we felt it deserved to be brought out in its own right. So that's a new risk that's in, that's risk number 1. Following the discussion we had around the board table last time, we have separated out perceived risks around EDI issues between their internal and their external impacts. We've separated them out as suggested, and they are reflected in a slightly recast risk 6 and risk 7. Those I think are the most significant changes in terms of the risks as they're set out at the table. For risk 2 to 8, which are there before, there's no change in the pre-mitigation and post-mitigation ratings. They are the same. Stepping back from that, last time around this table, we talked about the approach to risk, how we categorize risks, and also how it is that in these sessions I share with the board kind of how am I feeling about risk in the organization. So with regard to the first point, we've done some very, very initial PESTLE type kind of assessment, just the team around if you like, the external environment within which we work and what that might suggest. It's really just a first conversation about, could this be useful for the way in which we conceive of risk. I think it was picking up particularly a point that Eddie made last time around, although he didn't refer to PESTLE specifically. I think I understood behind your comments that, you know, a lot of our stuff was quite internally focused, and maybe we need to think about the external. So we had a first conversation about that, but it's very, very initial, and this might be something, you know, a pestle approach might be the sort of thing that might help us, but I think that's probably worth a lengthier conversation with the board than we're going to be able to manage today. But I really just wanted to signal that we've kind of taken the nudge and started the conversation internally, but we probably need to do this proper justice in due course. And it isn't reflected in any kind of fundamental change in this table that you've got in front of you. That's the first thing. The second thing, you know, okay, step back from, you know, as it were, the technical description of risk in this paper. How do I feel?
Yes.
I guess there's nothing that's fundamentally keeping me awake at night, if I can use that layman's way of describing the way in which I internalize our kind of view of risk. But I think the two things that are on my mind are, first of all, where the PSA type debate might go, because whether by accident or whether it's deliberate, if it goes down in a particular way, that could be existential for us in terms of its impact. But I'm not unduly worried about that because the discussion about a PSA, it's in its infancy really, and there is all to play for. And there's nothing specific to suggest that there is a major risk to us as an organisation and in terms of our existence. But it is very much on my mind as something which could be an issue, and which is why we need to be vigilant. The other thing that's on my mind is much more internal, and it sort of ties in with the discussion we had around business planning and our capability and capacity as an organisation to do the stuff we want to do on behalf of the travelling public, which is that I think there is a strand around our capability and the degree to which we are as well trained, as proficient as we should be in dealing with our work, which I think perhaps at the moment just slightly constrains our ability to do all the things that we would want to do. So it's not keeping awake at night, because I don't think the organisation is about to fall over, but in the spirit of wanting to be better and to be able to do the things that matter, and therefore in terms of our relevance to the people that we're representing, I think there's quite an important agenda for us to grab there in terms of improving the ability in which we just do things, whether it's through the training we offer our team, through our processes, how we manage some quite boring things. It's all fairly micro, but ultimately it's all about our ability to do more work more effectively. And I think, there are just one or two things which individually don't amount to much, but collectively, I think if we could do better, we would effectively create more capacity in the organisation to do. And I think that is something we need to kind of come back to. But
that's super.
I hope that's trying to reflect the spirit of what the conversation we had last time around. But if it's not, then we can do something different.
So it's risk as opportunity forgone as much as I was
yes, correct.
That, which is, I think, a very good way of using the risk. Thank you. So that we didn't schedule a substantive discussion on this. I think what we heard you say last time is that you wanted to understand how Michael is using it with the team, how it's shaping what he's worried about. I think he's just done that. But if there's anything quick, then do feel free to chip in. But I'm not saying it really. Okay, great, thank you. And I think the board should come back to risk in a more reflective way. And maybe what we take away from this is a deep dive on that organisational capability piece. And maybe what you're doing is you're surfacing some of the things which you might like to bring forward at some future date. So we'll leave that with you to think about what is it the board might be able to do to help on that. All right, goodness me, we've almost got to the end. So we had the last piece of AOB from me, but also can pick up anything from you. Mine was simply, we were just thinking about these meetings and how great they are sometimes when you get some external voices, and opening up the potential if there are particular people you want to hear from. So Rich really suggested somebody who was thinking about the future. That's a really good idea. But if you either want to say now or you want to go in and have a bit of think about it, I do think it would be a good provocation for us as a group of people, not just to talk to each other, but to bring some other people to the table as well. So have a think about who you might like to bring to the table and hear from. That was my AOB. So happy to take feedback now. We'll just come back separately. And then anything else from you? Anybody around the table? Anything we've missed?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We got to the, it was a pacey and packed meeting. And thank you very much to the team for all the hard work on getting us in order for it, especially to Kath, because this is your first. So well done.